These topics were self-generated by David's, what the community might be interested in talking about. And he and I sort of cooked it up together. And the guiding notion this evening. Oh, here's Paul. Hey, haven't seen you around. Did you just get back?
I got to Amsterdam
Last night? Yeah, like a lot of other people. It was a wild night.
Tonight's going to be really good.
Oh, great, Paul.
Lock the front door so people won't be coming in and out.
Okay.
This door, don't walk through it. You think you want to go through there, instead go around to the other one.
That was very helpful. David, did you want to introduce the theme?
Yeah.
Good. Do it.
I actually made a few notes. I suggested the idea of talking about insanity. It has a lot of personal meaning to me, aside from the value I thought it would have to the group. And I thought one thing I was thinking about, why do I want to talk about this to begin with? And for me, there's a way that I have this continual desire to somehow create an environment that somehow really is safer for myself. Somehow, some way that I can feel that the way that I express myself will somehow not result in me being ostracized or in some way otherwise sort of bottled up and packaged and sent off somewhere. I have this fear of what I'll call insanity. And I feel that this is something that really affects everyone in most of their daily life. I think it does mine at some subtle levels that we don't acknowledge enough. So I'd like to talk about sort of what it is to begin with. What is it? What is insanity? What is this fear that I have about crossing a line at which point I would be really ultimately somehow ostracized in some way? And how that stops me from growing in general. So I have this desire somehow to kind of expand my own awareness, other people's awareness enough to allow, so that it would allow more for myself, and that I would feel in some way more free to explore areas that are frightening to me otherwise to explore. And I wanted to mention a personal example for me. About 2 years ago, for those fortunate or unfortunate enough to find me, I could be seen in the garden at Esalen talking about God in a rapturous way. One of my fears of Arnie Mindell was here about a year ago or so, and he asked in one of our processes, he asked us to go around the room sort of and actually to pair up and tell our partner, if we were to go crazy, what form would it take? And my idea was of being a religious fanatic in some way. I have this thing, among other things, that there are areas that I've sort of experienced for myself, and for me it's been through drugs. Mild drugs, I might add. Where I've seen things that I've shut off and have felt in some way I haven't been able to integrate into my ordinary life. And I have this fear that for me to explore that area further might result in me walking, not only walking through the garden talking about God, but I might be discovered. I was lucky; not too many people saw me that day. And I think that this, there's something in general taboo about behavior, this is obvious, about behavior that just isn't norm enough. But what I'm struck by is how low the threshold is, for myself as well, to tolerate behavior that isn't ordinary enough. I mean, I'm very quick to say so-and-so is weird, or so-and-so is off, and this is part and parcel for myself, this judgment that I have of other people with the problem I'm sure that I have with allowing myself to be not ordinary. So I think there's a lot of issues to talk about when we talk about insanity. From what I've said, there's a lot of ways to go. I could say more about what I've said. I'm really interested in other people's experiences where they felt that those of you that are afraid of going crazy in any way, what that means to you. I find, as I'm talking about it now, I feel vulnerable even, talking about this experience, which I be open to going more into detail about, but by way of introduction, that's sort of where I'm at with the issue. I'm trying to find ways to allow more for myself and not be afraid of that if I explore too much, that it'll be too much, that I'll be, ostracized. I think the whole word taboo is relevant, and I'd like to to talk more about that, for that to come up for people, what their idea of taboo is, and how maybe that relates to insanity. It's like there's also this distinction between, if I'm onto something that's real, that's far out, that's weird, that's somehow the difference between creative genius and being a fool or being crazy or being pathological, that's a haunting thing. It's like, in either case, if I were onto something that was real, that maybe could be useful to other people, I still might be vulnerable to being called crazy, and maybe I have fear of being destroyed by that or something. And then I have the fear of that I'm wacko, that I'm not onto anything that has any relevance to anybody else, and that it's totally my own trip, and I would be more what the kind of person that I look at and I say, oh, that guy's just that guy's got a loose screw, or that guy's off the wall. And so, but in either case, I'm looking to find a way to have permission to be either of those things, either the fool or, or onto something that's maybe useful for other people. And how, in either case, to reckon with my fear about being ostracized.
Yeah, well, I sort of think along these lines, although a little differently. 3 times you used the word ostracized. What I'm always afraid of is that I'll be ostracized, except that it'll be entirely deserved. In other words, that going off the deep end into some kind of appropriate behavior. The word that I would use over and over again is disgrace. That it would disgrace everything. And it's gotten weird for me because there used to be nothing to disgrace because there was no reputation. Now I'm always aware that, if I go bananas, then people will say, what happened to that guy? You think this is good? You read these books? Did you hear how this guy ended up? So then it's all ruined. It's like they're saying about Woody Allen, his entire work must now be reassessed. And you think, oh God, what if that were me? Your entire work needs to be reassessed. And it's interesting to think about madness, or what we're calling madness. I mean, the religious thing is the one that overcomes me or overcame me. That's how I imagine I would go. And even as it is, I'm practically a repent, the end is nigh person. I mean, it's all couched in, we have the computer and the mathematics and the dazzling, rhetoric. But it's basically a the end is nigh rap of some sort. And yet I'm very intolerant intellectually. I mean, there are perfectly harmless, functioning people that I, in my own mind, consider crazy simply because of what they believe. I mean, one way of thinking about crazy is it's just you have looser rules of evidence than the rest of us. So, and in a society falling to pieces like ours, where nobody has a very firm grip on what's going on, if you're nuts, but you're not sure you're nuts, you just have to get 10 people to believe you, and suddenly you're a method, a school, a point of view. You're not nuts anymore. You're invited to teach your insanity and show others the way. But I think there's an unmistakable threshold that I think people who are insane in the way that you're concerned about and that I'm concerned about know it. It's not something, and I think Dick was the great exemplar in this area. I mean, he was nuts and he knew it. And he managed it and worked with it and got juice out of it and was sometimes overwhelmed by it. Because it's a feeling, don't you think? That it transcends intellectualizing. One can believe all kinds of odd things, but there's a certain existential intensity that overcomes you, and then you are crazy or insane because it's almost like with psychedelics or practices that are very powerful, you do begin to rise through some kind of spiritual domain. But if you're unbalanced slightly to one side or the other, you'll start to skew, and it'll get worse and worse, and it will feed back negatively into your life. And insanity is a kind of like a divine madness of some sort. I mean, it's not clear what it is exactly. I mean, I think people really do touch extraordinary states. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I haven't seen like hundreds of people who were diagnosed as mad. But these people who go off the deep end with religious ideas and so forth, it seems to me there's more going on than a disintegrating psychology, because it's always accompanied by events in the real world which reinforce the crazy assumption. It's like, from the point of view of the person who is undergoing this, there's ample evidence always at hand that they're not crazy, that this is really happening. I remember when I was at my most unreclaimable, one of the things I would do, it was in the Amazon, and very fortunately, because modern mental health care delivery systems couldn't reach me, And so I survived it, but otherwise I doubt that I would have, because when they drug you and interrupt these cycles of whatever this is, then it's very hard to ever get straight again. But the form that my madness would take, I mean, on one level, was I would go alone into the jungle, and I could call butterflies to me, which was a strange thing because I had earlier made my living as a butterfly collector. And so I would just, like St. Francis, I would go out and hold up my hands, and the butterflies would come and descend and walk on my hands. And I would... Oh yes, no, this happened. I mean, nobody was there but me, but... And, we can even create an explanation that I was able to generate an odor or something that brought them in. But so then I would have like an epiphany. It would prove to me my divine nature and my divine mission and so forth and so on. And so then I would sink to my knees, the butterflies surrounding me, and weep with ecstasy that I had been granted this sign, and then weep a little more, but then the mind would begin to wander, and then I would think about how but nobody else is getting the benefit of this miracle. And so then I would dry my tears and go look for somebody to show this to. And then I would take these people who were by now fairly concerned about my state of mind anyway, and I would insist that they walk with me into the jungle, and then I would hold out my arms to the skies expecting butterflies to descend and envelop me, and of course nothing would happen. And then people would just turn away, aghast at such a display of hubris, ego, fucked up, delusory, just that you'd lost it, you would become unbearable, egomaniacal. And then you say, but no, listen, it's really true. And then it's even more pathetic. And so there are, cycles of distancing that go on. I don't know. I think in the course of a life lived to its fullest, most people have passed through these places on some level or another. Is that generally agreed upon? Is this totally wild territory to everybody here, or no? No, it's pretty, yeah.
But I'm raising the issue of leaving, not exactly passing through, but, for myself, leaving something unresolved that still needs to be integrated. And I imagine you have this with places that you've been to, Terence, where there's, in some way, it's not resolved, and to go, and my fear is to explore too much is a ticket to a crazy bomb of some kind.
Well, leaving consensus. I mean, I think it's true that with psychedelics, the practice works too well almost, in that it will, if you insist on, I don't want to use the word abusing it, but if you insist on using psychedelics frequently at high doses, back to back, you will unlock your way into a set of assumptions and perceptions and feelings that not very many people can follow you into. And then the question is, have you gone into a spiritual domain, or have you just fallen off the track? And it's hard to tell, and maybe it can happen both ways. It's so hard to convey the mind of the schizophrenic. I mean, people who we call crazy do not seem to themselves to be crazy. They look at the world from a different perspective and through a different logic, but they're trying to make sense of it. It's just that the data that they're trying to handle is extremely alien from what the rest of us use. I mean, I can remember when I was in the States that I would it's so hard to explain, but I would like see waves of historical association out of my past. I mean, it's like I would be in a small town in Colombia, but something would... It would be as though there was another time, a time from my past, overlaid over everything. And so a waitress serving me in a restaurant, a hotel keeper, would also be another person in another time, in another place, with a set of associations to me. And I had a friend, actually, who became schizophrenic and did get electroshock and the whole 9 yards. And he said, what you have to do, what you must do, is learn to shut up. Do not run around. And there's a compulsion to confess as well. This is not easy because there's something about these perceptions that have to be communicated. And yet when you communicate them, people are appalled. They do not know how to handle it. I remember when my brother did what he called turning inside out. And, he didn't know whether he was Agnes or Angus. And there was some intimation of some psychosexual transformation. It wasn't clear whether it was like a transsexual operation or the metamorphosis of an insect or something else. And, he's saying this, I mean, I don't know. I suppose we can multiply these examples endlessly. In thinking about this talk, for me personally, what it comes down to is somehow, and I don't know the how, but the issue is clear, I think. It's an issue of courage and of failure of nerve. You have to be willing to put yourself on the line. And it's all tied into what we always talk about in these circles, which is the ego, and how the ego's final defense against its own dissolution is telling you that you're either going mad or dying. And in the psychedelics, you can usually defeat the dying rap because you just have to have the faith that you're not dying on 15 milligrams of psilocybin. It's highly unlikely, not impossible, but you can argue that it's unlikely. But when it tells you you're going mad, you have nothing to stand on because you can't tell. Who knows? I mean, what is the effective dose of psilocybin for triggering madness? The question doesn't even exist back in the world you left behind. And the only way Shakespeare says, screw your courage to the sticking point. The only way I've found to deal with this is the rough, personally speaking, the absolutely rough, straight-ahead way, which is after putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, I finally just say, oh, fuck it, do it, if that's what you want to do, if you want to destroy me, do it. But it requires, it's a kind of recklessness. I can't find a calm place in which to meet it. I can only meet it if I force myself to assume that it's going to leave me high and dry. I remember a psychotherapist who I don't want to name, but who used psychedelics very extensively for years and years and turned on hundreds of people and with combinations and all kinds of stuff. Toward the end of his life, it grew harder and harder and harder for him to take it. And when I asked him why, he said, I always have bad trips. And we talked about it, whether that it was, that just a lifetime of tripping other people had done this, or whether maybe as you pass a certain age, it doesn't do the same thing, it becomes darker and darker, or whether it was something in his personality. I really resist the idea that you could ever get to the place where you say, as some people love to say, psychedelics, I took them, don't need them anymore, learned what it has to offer. But one reason, one excuse that I use in my own inner rhetoric is that, sitting here in this moment, I can really strongly imagine what it's like to be stoned on any one of these things. It doesn't feel remote to me anymore. And I don't know whether that's a delusion, an excuse for not doing it, or whether my thresholds are getting lower. I don't know. I was in London a few weeks ago and at a party, and I was the guest of honor, and they brought out last year's Welsh mushrooms and made a big tea for everybody, and the hostess said, it's just almost like a gesture. There are so many of us and so few mushrooms, but we'll each just get a little bit. Well, so I was first out of the chute, and I was, I don't know whether it all pooled on the top in one place or what was going on, but I just sat down on the ground, and this guy who said, some person of great reputation who said he'd wanted to meet me for years and years, was sitting in front of me trying to get to know me. And finally he said, "You're flaming, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I can't carry on this conversation. I just have to hold on to the grass." Well, I don't know what all this means. I don't want to become afraid of it, and I blame myself. I don't think the thing has a negative edge unless you've somehow come out of jiggle with it. And I don't know whether that means, what does it mean if it becomes harder and harder to take these things? Does it mean you're getting out of balance? Does it mean you're just getting older? Where should the blame be put? And then what can you do about it? The only thing I found to do about it is stop running and turn and face it. But each time I do that, it seems to require the very limit of my courage. And I don't know how long one's courage lasts. Maybe it's not a bad thing. After all, people who climb mountains, like Mount Everest, they don't do it till their dying day. At some point, they, knock off and become a consultant for a sportswear manufacturer or something. Well, what does anybody else think about any of this?
I'm getting agitated.
Oh.
I'm getting really agitated because, I don't know even what you're talking about, except that you're talking about having your mushrooms and you're having these experiences. And I've never taken drugs in my life, ever. And I've had just normal, or just abnormal, kind of breaks since I was 15. And I'm having these things, and I'm not eating anything, it just comes on, and it's very scary for me. And from the time, and David, I really feel for what you were saying, because I'm scared to death. Because since I was like 15 and, in high school, and then they sent me to the hospital, and psychiatrists got hold of me 35 years ago and did a number on me. And, quickly I learned that when the experience comes and that I get scared, I go back to that doctor, and I did that until I came to Esalen 7 years ago. And when I came here, I came to meet Dick and work with him, and I asked him to work with me, and he took me under his wing for 6 weeks and worked with me every other day. And what I had then, David, was I had permission to go through it, and he was going to be there with me. And then Dick died. We hiked Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Monday, he said to me, "Are you ready to go up here by yourself? Because, pretty soon you have to go alone." And I said, I don't want to go alone. I just want to be with you. And then on Wednesday, he died. And I'm haunted by that because I keep coming back to Esalen, and they say, well, Dick's dead now, this is not the place for you to go through that. And I said, well, where in the fuck is the place to go? Because there's so many people here that want to go through to this other side. I don't want to do it living in my van on the streets in San Diego. It's not about me telling people my experience. Sometimes the actions look pretty bizarre to the people out on the streets, and I get to the point where then they're alarmed and they call me back. Right, and I'm not walking around telling them that, so it's like, okay, if I'm living away from Esalen, even at Esalen now, because last year I was having a break, and I went to jail in the lodge, and I was really scared, and I was reaching out, and she said, well, why don't you go to a movie in town for a few hours and then see, and that was the wrong thing to say, so I terrified and somehow ended up in San Diego in the hospital, got on some new kind of medication, and that's been the pattern too. But when Dick was here and I felt like there was, a support to go through it, that felt okay, And then, now when it comes up, I do get scared, and I don't go through it like you just suggested. I go back and, take a drug. And I haven't been on a drug for 10 months now, and I'm back here, and I'm terrified that when it comes up, I'm going to have to run away. I don't feel a support anymore here. And what haunts me is that Dick wanted to have that. That was his dream. I know he's dead and it's not his place anymore. But, his dream was to have a sanctuary where, right down there in that canyon. He talked to me for 6 weeks about, putting me in on the deal. And, I'd be the first one he turns loose in there like they did with him. And that you wander around and have all kinds of experiences. And then if you come out fine, if you don't come out, they could ship you off up the highway somewhere until you're...
Well, but in fact, most people came out fine, I think. No, all these drugs, these antipsychotic drugs, are basically warehousing strategies for the convenience of doctors, because the only way that works with people who have this problem is so labor-intensive and so demanding. What you need basically is 6 people to watch you, some to hold your hand and reassure you, some to physically grab you and sit on you when you head for the hills. Very few people get through it without being messed with. Like I say, I think I was lucky and my brother was lucky because some force, some intuition led us to get so far out that they couldn't find us. They literally couldn't come and get us. R.D. Lang, as well as Dick, had this idea that people have to go through it.
But not everybody can go to I can't right now go to the jungle.
You've got to have some kind of a support group. And if you don't have a support group, then you have to stay away from people who will mess with it. And, it's hermit time, if nothing else. Yeah.
There are several places now open. One is called Pocket Ranch in Geyserville.
It's $475 a day, and I've been crazy since I'm 15, so I can't even get insurance that would even pay for that. So it's kind of for people that are rich.
No scholarshiping? I don't know that.
No, they don't have anything. Because Steve gave me some brochures when I found out about that. And Medicare doesn't pay for that. I'm on disability for psychiatric problems, from Social Security, and they don't pay for shit, which is good in a way, because I don't get too many drugs that way. They don't cover it.
Well, it's hard to tease apart whether you've got. I think it's amazing to me that at Esalen that we're discussing insanity. It's even, I think, a kind of an old-fashioned word. You'd think this would be the thing they would have worked through here. Isn't that what... it was Steve who said to me once, you'll understand this place a lot better if you think of it as a kind of hospital. And I've, looked at it like that ever since. We have all these therapists. The greats have come and gone, of 3 schools now, and we don't understand it. So what can we expect from the rest of society? When I was schizophrenic, if this is what we're talking about, my feeling about it was, and maybe this is, if not true, a delusion worth playing with, is I thought, what we call mental illness, what we call schizophrenia, and what we look into the body or the mind or the personal history or the dream state to try and understand and possibly cure, it's not like that at all. It isn't if you're the person who's nuts, it isn't your problem. It's something that's happened to you. Not more fundamentally than catching the flu. It's like you just happened to step in some cosmic doo-doo, and now it's on the bottom of your shoe, and everybody's pointing at you and backing up, but it isn't your fault. It was just happened to be in your path. It's a kind of, it's a horrible piece of luck, unless you can turn it to your own advantage. And what that means, I think, is obviously integrating it. Well, then how do you integrate these things? I think it has to do, again, a lot with where you start from. Just speaking from my own personal experience, what saved me was my cynicism. That I didn't believe in anything, never had always thought believing in things was a bad idea. So then when this whole cosmos of beliefs was handed to me on a platter, I just simply said, maybe, I'll act it out, but I won't believe it. And I think that had I been a good Mormon, a good Catholic, a good Buddhist, a good something else, then I would have been lost, because I would have traded whatever it was I believed for the new set of beliefs. As it was, I just said, what's this? Beliefs. I don't do that. But I played with it, and somehow the playing with it was able to depotentiate it. I had a conversation with someone very recently who, by ordinary standards, I think would have to be considered nutty as a fruitcake. And, they could hardly speak of their condition without being swept by an emotion that was so intense that it reduced them to tears, And I said, if you're going to be this nuts, you should enjoy it more. It's too, and they said, I am enjoying it. And I said, well, I'm not enjoying it because you're just projecting such an emotional intensity that it makes me very nervous. And I think I speak then for the sane general masses about that. What makes it hard for the person who's going through this is that it's so hard for other people. I mean, it's freaky to be around somebody who's crazy. I don't, because I'm such a purveyor of psychedelics, people are forever leaning on me to trip with them. And I dare say, there are people in this room who've known me for years, and no one here can say they've ever been seriously loaded with me, because I just don't do it. I can't take it. I can't handle the feeling of risk that permeates that. That's why it amazes me. I'm fascinated by people who have such faith in their knowledge that apparent difficult situations don't freak them out. As an example, some of you know Frank Barr. He's an emergency room doctor. And I'm amazed that he can deal with people who are dead out unconscious and just say, she'll come to in 40 minutes or so, don't worry about that. When I would be frantic. I mean, if I can't get a reaction out of somebody, I just go berserk. And the notion, I don't know whether that's a kind of callousness. Therapists are like that. I mean, they say, you come upon somebody flopping around on the floor, screaming, pleading, weeping. My inclination is to make them feel better, for God's sake. And a therapist would just say, well, they're working through their stuff. That's all right, How do you get that level of self-confidence where you can see somebody in agony and say, that's all right, it's the best thing for them. Check on them in an hour and to see where they're at. It's awfully... so I stay away from it. And in my own situation, I keep people away from me. I've had many trips where I've thought in the middle of it, thank God there's no one here to see this. Because if there were someone here to see it, I'm sure they would become alarmed and decide that some crisis was in progress. And, ultimately you have to sort of get a kind of perspective where you just say, if I die, I die. But it usually has to slam you to the wall pretty severely to make you turn. The image I have is that I run from it until I become so furious at this humiliating situation that I turn and face it. And then, if you curse it, it will step back sometimes. It's worked every time. The other thing is, the wonderful instinct for equilibrium that the human mind has, that you can get pretty twisted around. And if you'll wait 24 hours, 72 hours, 10 days, 6 months, it will restore to equilibrium. I'm puzzled by the cases of permanent raving madness, and I wonder how common they are. It's all messed up in this society. I can show you psychiatric residents who have never seen an unmedicated schizophrenic in their entire life, because they just do not encounter people in that state. What they deal with are people who come in and been given drugs and kept on drugs and drugs. That's the whole dynamic.
Terence, I'm thinking about the last person here that the community really got behind sitting for through a state of this. I'm wondering how much to say because she's not here, but perhaps the reason we don't know more about this is, as you say, how many psychiatric residents have ever seen somebody who's not on a caretaking drug. Mm-hmm. And the amount of energy it took for the community to mobilize to take care of this person was pretty overwhelming. Mm-hmm. It takes a team of 6 to 12 people.
Day in and day out.
Day in and day out, and this went on for 10 days or so.
Mm-hmm. 30 days. 30 days.
And was there a resolution that was satisfying?
There was a resolution of sorts, but the thing that I was most impressed with is in a psychiatric ward among people who didn't know the person, you would have assumed that all these associations were meaningless stuff and that the person had been in. And the review of the material, it all made sense in a particular way. And that would be completely missed. There was definitely a way that a lot of stuff was being worked through, maybe not to satisfaction, but on some level, that you couldn't possibly know unless you knew this person very, very well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw with my brother. When my brother went bananas, I sat, and, it was a complicated case because there was something wrong with me in the sense that I didn't sleep for 11 days. But he raved day and night. And what in every single thing was, or to my mind, at least 90% of it was incredibly interesting and revelatory. He imitated every relative. He imitated music teachers not dealt with since age 6. He revealed vast scenarios of stuff going on in the town where we had grown up together. Well, if he had been straitjacketed in a ward somewhere, they would have just thought that this was garbage, and what it actually was, brilliant insightful, almost literarily deep stuff. And the other thing is, I've always thought, that a mental ward, I don't understand the thinking of the psychiatric community. A mental ward is my idea of an environment designed to drive you crazy. I mean, because crazy people drive me crazy. Just one who is very slightly crazy is unbearable. And to be put into a ward with people wandering around, and I really think it's a pheromonal, I don't want to go as far as some people have gone and say that schizophrenia is entirely a pheromonal disorder. But do you know what I'm talking about here? Well, some people say that that we have left over from earlier stages of evolution all kinds of physiological systems that produce odors that we are not consciously aware of, but that set the ambiance for social interaction, because we are, after all, social animals. We're as social as honeybees or something. And all social animals regulate behavior through pheromones. And it's known, for instance, that when a person walks into a crowded room, instinctively the first thing they do is they take a deep breath. And it's thought that this is a whole bunch of chemical messengers are coming in saying, people have been drinking, one couple isn't getting along, somebody's on the make, so all this stuff is going on, and you get this gestalt in one single moment. Well, then, because of a phenomenon that's fairly common called allophenia, which is where your friend gets committed to a mental hospital for schizophrenic behavior, and you buy a book and take it to them and visit them, and while visiting, you behave so oddly that you're not allowed to leave. Allophenia. Schizophrenic behavior by non-schizophrenic persons in the presence of schizophrenia. It's thought that perhaps what schizophrenia is an odor malfunction where the person who is becoming schizophrenic is literally beginning to smell funny. And this causes the people around them to begin to send the wrong signal, which begins to activate anxiety in the schizophrenic person, which accentuates the production of the pheromones. So then people start saying, that guy's really weird. He's so weird. Well, then the person picks up on this. And what's happening, your word, ostracized. They're being pushed to the periphery of the social thing. And they feel it's unfair because and the people doing it don't know why they're doing it. And what's happening is it's a horrible misunderstanding, and it ends in making somebody completely dysfunctional because they don't know, they've lost their place in the net. They literally don't know who they are.
And you're pointing out a fragile and kind of a desperate nature of consensual reality, where there's a desperate grip on this consensual reality, and when that starts to slip, when people feel that that's slipping, there's some grabbing that goes on, and that's the response that you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, that it's somehow we're all anxious about this. I mean, consciousness, after all, is probably, less than 100,000 years old. So and we're losing it all the time. I mean, when you deal with these real nightmare trips, like the Jeffrey Dahmer thing, the reason that's so horrifying, I think, is because it's a loss of any value that you can relate to. It's like the real darkness rises up, and you say, it's all so fragile. If we stopped loving each other, or even just talking about how we should love each other, then, cannibalism, murder, sacrifice, death. I mean, inevitably, these really horrifying mass murder things are very primitive. in some sense. I mean, dismemberment and so forth. It's fetishism. It's an activation of primitive forms of behavior. So I think the anxiety we feel around these issues is because mental clarity, sanity, belonging, these things are fragile, and we've each earned it, and it wasn't easy, and so we're anxious about our purchase on it. You know, I always felt that in the 60s it was so clear to me when LSD was around and that I would debate it with my parents and people were talking about whether they would take it or not, that the people who were alarmed by it were alarmed by it because they self-diagnosed themselves as insane. They knew, said, you know, we don't want it. Are you kidding? A drug that opens the doorways to the inner world of the mind? No, thank you. You know, that's the last thing we're interested in. And they were right. You know, they had no business fiddling with that. Well, we're the children of those people, and in some cases, you know, maybe those people ourselves. So it's very dicey. I really admire people. I don't understand these people who just take these enormous doses of psychedelics and it just beats the shit out of them, and 1 week later they're back ready for more. You know, they don't. I mean, it's like they're made of different stuff than I am. Don't they understand? You know that it's. I don't. I mean, I admire them. I just don't have that kind of stamina. I take it too seriously. Alan, did you want to say something?
Well, I was confused by what you were saying. Who are you referring to that does this?
Which?
It takes huge doses and it slams them around?
Well, I know people who just describe outlandish trips and then they say they'll be doing 8 grams again and looking forward to it. And I know one person who says, each time I take it, I try to stand more. And I have the feeling, you know, that it's very coddling of me, and that I sort of march around inside a hall of mirrors, because I can say to it, stop coddling me. And after 30 seconds of what happens when I say that, I'm saying, coddle me, enough already. You know, because it begins to go fugue-like and lift these veils, and you say, oh, you know, it's, I don't know, maybe I read too much H.P. Lovecraft as a kid, and it contaminated my categories.
Yeah, it's something that David said that is sort of away from psychedelics, but on this vein of discovering something that maybe I keep myself from. Some, not just your normal discoveries, you know, but those real choice little cherries. And somewhere I have this, it almost seems like it's a tape that says, well, if you know that, and if you claim it, then how will you fit in the rest of the world? And it's like a stop measure. I don't know how to explain it, but when you were talking, I was really getting that, and I was hoping I could share it. And, you know, I haven't ever really talked about this with anybody, so it does feel vulnerable. But aside from that, it seems like there's something that is remembered when I have a revelation, or when I really understand something, you know, like I cognite with something. It almost feels like it's a memory that's come back. And, you know, again, I'm speaking of, I don't even know, of the real choice mysteries that, you know, kind of keep ourselves from somehow. And I don't know, I guess I just wanted to share that, but maybe what experience have you had with that, or...
But that's a positive, it's an uplifting experience, right?
The stopping isn't.
Talk more about the stopping.
Well, I guess I get to a place that is almost like, well, what I see are lots of different past lives. I don't even know if they're past lives, really. I can't even categorize them as that, but I see different symbols and different relationships to civilizations. And, just kind of I sense things that I knew, or things that, were available. Things that are available to all of us on an even greater scale. Sort of some universal, or even, some people call it the Akashic Records or something. But not to be too much in that vein. And I'll start to grasp it, and I'll start to maybe claim it or understand it, and then I'll get this. I'll get sort of this imbalance going, or maybe it's my thought that if I have it, then I won't have this place in the world, or I won't have a place in the world that nobody else is like me.
You mean that you'll learn something that will set you so apart that you'll not be able to fit into the world?
Yes.
For me, I have a horror sometimes of the sense of when I come down, as I start to come down, of the certainty that I'm coming into illusion and something that is essentially meaningless compared to where I just was.
So a horror of return.
Well, it's a horror of that I've somehow created a universe that is like, somehow it's my fault, that I'm returning to something that is less than.
What it might be, or what it could be,
yeah,
or what you saw it to be in that state.
And then I will gradually forget, and experiences of gradually forgetting even that.
Well, I don't. Maybe we're a special slice. I mean, there is the notion that, first of all, it's a monkey brain that we're operating with here. Nowhere is it writ large that it can actually encompass the truth. I mean, why should it? I mean, do we believe that banana trees perceive the truth? They're flatworms, so why should monkeys? So then if you're into these consciousness expanding techniques, whether they're just simply paying attention or using psychedelic drugs or something else, then you actually get to a place where there is, it's like an abyss of knowing. It's like that poem that says, I look over your meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of the things that you have not said. Well, that's about a relationship. But it could also just be, I look over meaning's edge and feel the dizziness of things unsaid. It's that nowhere is it writ that the universe should be rationally apprehendable. And maybe when you get the distances and the energies and the time scales, when you have even a remote intimation of these things, it's your mind can't handle it. It actually implodes under the force of reality. I mean, I sort of feel like that what we have uncovered with all this thinking and exploring is not the white light or some cheerful Buddhist hypostatization like that, but what we've uncovered is ungodly complexity. I remember once at the height of an LSD trip years ago being with somebody who yelled out, I'm drowning in the spaghetti of ambiguity. I know that feeling, It's just that, it's all very cut and dried. It's, and then you start delving, and you start, reading weird literature and taking strange drugs and going to strange places, and you begin this deconstruction process. And what you find out is not only that the world is weirder than you can suppose, but that this situation is fundamentally alarming, that the world is stranger than you can suppose. And it carries an existential implication. It does for me. I mean, I can't believe anymore that just now speaking of the psychedelics, that this is about human psychology. You press it too hard and go too far. And I always think of that amazing scene in Rosemary's Baby where Mia Farrow, in the middle of this dream, sits up and says, "My God, this is really happening." And that's the thing which lies behind all this delving, that, the cheerful assumption that it's all mental and that you're going to return to reality and that the here and now is the stable part of the mandala, it may not be true, or it seems to me that it's not necessarily true. And then you just say, you could find out something that would make it impossible to speak to anybody, that you would just have to turn away from people with an unspeakable truth and be isolated by it.
Well, I wanted to ask a question that came up for me last weekend.
Mm-hmm.
You said that when you took DMT to the shamans in South America, the ayahuasqueros, and they said that it was ancestor spirits were coming through. A comment, I believe I heard you say this, that the ayahuasqueros seemed to be more interested in using the ayahuasca or the medicines they had for more like a doctor would. That is how I've used them. I would say more like helping someone.
Mm-hmm.
And how you use them is more for an inquiry, like to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference? Is one more of a psychological approach and one more an intellectual? I'm curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, one is a shamanic approach because the center thing of shamanism is healing. I mean, that's really how you judge a shaman in a traditional fashion, is by healing. And then this other, it is intellectual, and because the idea is to be able to say something. And I guess maybe where the problem comes, and I'm blinded to it because I have the problem, is that you have to have heart, a lot of it. I mean, maybe more heart than I'm able to muster, and that if you try and do it through the intellect alone, it becomes, I don't know, there's some mythological metaphor here, but it becomes titanic, it becomes dangerous, and possibly capable of collapsing upon itself. Maybe the healing is the way you pay your dues, and that somehow curiosity alone is a false coinage, and that the lack of the desire to heal is the manifestation of the lack of heart. I mean, I don't know. I just know, that if you have a heart mission, I think it's easier to travel those rails. Anybody else? Yeah.
I was just yesterday confronted with this accident on Highway 1 here, which was pretty major. And somebody died in a burning car wreck. And the ground process, I realized that how traumatic that was for me. And like how the whole day before I was kind of like everything turned gray, and it was really trying to get out of it, and it reminded me of, not only for myself, but like sometimes you see something that's just like so horrible, where you feel you have seen too much and it makes you insane. And I was just wondering about that, that connection, that you maybe witnessed something as a child or at war or wherever that is just so horrific about the potential of, the human race or whatever happens, that you can't fathom it, that you can't, try to leave.
And you mean, and then you're like contaminated by this image? Yeah, well, I think a lot about that kind of thing because, one of the things that has been established through places like Esalen, I think, and rightly so, and correctly, is that images can heal, and that visualization can promote health and this sort of thing. But what you never hear discussed then is the implied opposite, which is that some images can harm, and that information has a quality of harming and hurting. We are the inheritors of Lockean theories of government, and so our approach toward information is, free speech, and anything can be said. But I don't know whether this may, I feel very sensitive to images. It's a kind of funny thing. So I don't own a TV, simply because I think it's a source of toxic imaging. And one of the forms that the encroaching madness induced by the psychedelics takes, I've noticed, is that you are open to invasion by images that are loose in the mass consciousness. On 3 separate occasions, I've seen people freak out on psychedelics about Charles Manson. Either they thought they were Manson, or they thought I was Manson, or they thought something, Well, it's clear that this is toxic information that moves around in the body politic and then is magnified under certain circumstances. Auschwitz, all of this stuff, and all the images of sadomasochism, and our society seems more into this than any in history. I read a really freaky thing. I don't even understand some of this stuff. This is my idea of toxic information. Maybe some of you saw this. It was in Time or Newsweek around the time of the Jeffrey Dahmer trial. Norman Mailer wrote an essay on the psychotic as harbinger of future style, and said, the psychotic is the role model for the future. And like I say, I can't even understand what this stuff means or who understands this, but I didn't think it should be said. I thought, this is the raving of a diseased mind, and now it's in the bloodstream of the culture. Huh? Yeah. And it contaminates. A whole culture can sink into madness, we like to think we're in a terminal phase of decadence, but the Roman Emperor Heterogabulus used to castrate his lovers and hurl them out on the front steps of the official residence to be found in the morning by the street sweepers. We have a way to go before we get to those places. But still, maybe it's because of Freud and Nietzsche and all the bad boys of the 19th century or something, but we really have pried open a fairly toxic aspect of ourselves. And in the name of facing ourselves, we tend to make ourselves more ill, I think. I've always had trouble with Stan's theory about the unconscious, and I can't go to those slideshows with the crazy, I can't take it, you know, and I don't know what that means about me, whether it means I'm sensitive or feel threatened by all that stuff, but it just seems to me unnecessary and unhelpful. Yeah.
I found that to be true too. 6 hours of that type of slideshow was too much.
Well, and when you hear about somebody like Salvador Roquette, who will take, you know, a room full of Jewish women from Yonkers and give them 500 micrograms of LSD and then show Auschwitz, army footage of Auschwitz, you think, you know, this is my idea of hell. This is exactly what I don't want to get near and would expect to emerge from severely impaired in my personal progress, you know. This is kind of a downer, isn't it? I think it's all, there's a lot of, an impulse in a lot of schools of psychotherapy to rub your nose in it. And I don't know, you represent a school. How do you see that? I don't know what your school's position is on this, but do we have to rub our nose in it, or we miss it, or what's that all about?
I'm not going to talk in terms of a school, but if I take psychedelics, I go out in nature.
And you're okay there.
And I'm okay there. And so that what I don't want amplified won't happen. That's what I personally do. I can't imagine doing that or exposing it. I can't imagine taking 1,000 micrograms of LSD in this room at night.
Right, that would be too profaning.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's my own personal.
But it isn't, you can never insulate yourself from it. I mean, I've had trips about nature that are sort of along the lines of, you know, the life cycle of the alien. And it was all about how it was a vision of nature as this thing feeding upon itself, and how egg cases were being inserted into tissue, and free-swimming life stages were attaching to tissue, and pathways were being... I mean, it's a yuck image, and that could come easily out of examining 6 square inches of soil under a redwood tree. It isn't always affirming. It's like there's a balance in your own perception that if it's thrown off, a sunset can drive you into despair. What is the general... I mean, there's a lot of expertise in the room. Is it useful for us to go through these darker sides of ourselves? Do we feel better afterwards, or does bringing it to the surface then you have shit on the surface?
I personally think, because it must be my German heritage, I like to go into those places and like to discover those dark sides of my soul or whatever it is, you know. I like to really rub my nose into it, because usually if something isn't a part of me, it doesn't touch me.
Uh-huh.
You know, so if something touches me in a way, I like to go to the root of it.
And what is there when you get there? I mean, what's the experience, in other words, of instead of saying, oh no, not that, my God, saying, oh great, a chance to understand more about myself, and rush in? What do you find when you get in there?
I just find that I get a more complete picture of the whole.
Uh-huh.
Like I feel like I get, you know, the karmic wheel.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm discovering every aspect of it instead of just heading for the light. And gives me a better understanding of human nature, of the human psyche, of my own psyche.
Yeah, well, I think
I don't think it's pleasurable.
But is it awful?
It's awful if you make it awful. It's awful when you put a judgment on it.
So the trick is to just not judge it.
The trick is to just not judge it and just see it off the other side of the karmic wheel.
Well, I think that's what I do, but I feel, it's a struggle to not judge it. You say, oh God, if I judge this, it will get worse. I should just try and ride it through.
I'll give a try on the school part of it.
Uh-huh.
And what's haunting me is this picture of having these women from Yonkers take 500 micrograms and watch this stuff. There is this modern pop psychology idea, some of which is to the monetary benefit of therapists, that wallowing in this stuff gets you somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And my current thinking, which is always, of course, subject to change, is that very fine edge between not denying something and not wallowing in it either.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very difficult...
That's a good point, yeah.
Allowing.
Yeah.
Allowing.
That's what I mean. You stay the observer to it. You become the witness to it, and without judging it as good or bad or whatever, it's just...
So a kind of detachment.
Yeah.
Well, even
It's
more than
different.
that, from the Gestalt perspective, which I'll represent, the edge between wallowing and, you don't ever want to deny, but you want to go into something far enough to begin to get a reversal, to begin to get the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So, from the theoretical thing, I don't know how wallowing would ever serve that purpose.
So what you're talking about, though, is coming to a place of balance, right? Ultimately,
Well,
it's being
it's-
able to integrate and accept all of the various aspects.
Mm-hmm.
But wallowing, obviously, is not coming to a point of balance. What you're talking about with the women from Yonkers and the, watching the film, that is... You don't come into balance by assaulting your psyche with everything that is the most horrific that you could possibly confront. And I think that can be very damaging, and probably more so to some people than others, because people's tolerances are different, people's individual place of balance is different, and so I think there is a lot of individual variation, and it's very subtle and it's very delicate. But I agree that toxicity is toxic in whatever form it comes, and if it has that effect, I do not see benefit in that.
Well, perhaps a better word than wallowing could be formulated. It's just the one that I chose. But in dealing with psychological material, you're mostly dealing with something that's already happened. So why would you ever want to stay in something that the outcome is predetermined, that you already know the end?
Mm-hmm.
Most people are most afraid of what they've already experienced.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you want to spend a lot of time hanging around in a bad place that you've already experienced, that you already know the end outcome of? But you also don't want to deny that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the kind of edge. That may be a better way of saying it. To begin then to get a reversal.
Yeah, I think we all have a sense of that there should be a balance, but we all have a different sense of where it should be. For instance, I feel mild irritation with people who don't like horror literature. But I don't like slasher literature, and I'm very clear what the difference is. One is psychological and the other is science fiction. But I can't put up with, Silence of the Lambs and From There On, because it's offensive. But on the other hand, if somebody doesn't want to see Alien because they say it scares them, I think that they're a nervous Nelly, and that they should actually steel themselves to this experience. And it's good to watch Alien because you learn something.
Well, I think that's it. It confers an immunity. It's one of the reasons why people go. It's a feeling that it confers some sort of immunity by having undergone it.
Maybe that's why people are into all these affectations of negativity. It's a kind of sympathetic magic. So maybe this is why adolescents who feel tremendously empowered are into, T-shirts with dismembered bodies and, bands whose images rotate around themes of mayhem, incest, and destruction. It's a kind of counter charm. And in that case, it shouldn't be put down. These people are not sick. They're doing something to keep from being sick. They're gaining confidence by associating in a familiar manner with the things that actually make them very nervous and uneasy. I don't know. This could be cheap shot. But I tend to, I would stick with that for a minute. I tend to think that's true because I know some of these people who are behind all of these symbols, and they seem like very nice people who are striving to keep their lives together. My son is one of them. Every time I have an impulse to condemn, it is pretty horrific. My son brings home CDs, and I read the lyrics, and it is a jaw-dropper what some of this stuff is, But then if you actually play the CD, you discover that the lyrics are so lost in walls of noise and special effects and all this other stuff that it isn't as in your face as when you read the lyrics. And in any case, nobody's ever topped that Doors song about murdering your father and screwing your mother, and that was the anthem of our generation. So who are we to point a finger at Guns N' Roses? We think of the Doors as a wholesome impulse or something. I don't know. Some incredible mental sleight of hand goes on here. Sympathy for the devil. All of this stuff. It's black in that phase. But if you're in it, it's fun, it's theater, it establishes a ring pass knot that keeps the boring people out. If you're on the outside, this is pathological, demented, it leads to mass murder, and it's unacceptable. Well, you got to go easy on some of this. Anybody?
Where do you stand to judge anything is what comes up with that.
Right.
I have a question about Prague.
Uh-huh.
The conference that was held there, not the advertised conference, but the one that was not advertised.
Uh-huh.
What was the outshoot of that, if you can talk about it, as far as the future of psychedelics in this country? And will they be made legal again at some point, or do we anticipate that?
Something's going on. I don't understand. There's some kind of high-level policy review underway. It's hard to figure out what is happening at this moment to motivate it. Maybe it's that Europe is actually moving closer and closer to legitimizing research, and it just puts pressure on the American scientific establishment. Rick Strassman has been able to do his DMT study in New Mexico. That ibogaine study on the East Coast is moving forward on the flimsiest of evidence. I don't believe for a moment that ibogaine interrupts morphine addiction. I think it's a brilliant ploy for getting a research program funded, but just the evidence, I don't know. As I understand it, it's one guy's sort of personal revelation. I don't know. It probably depends on whether or not there's a change of administration. In that, if there is no change of administration, you can be damn sure there won't be an era of psychedelic research.
What was the conference? What was that conference?
Well, it was the ITA, with the International Transpersonal Association, and then there was an unannounced conference headed by Rick Doblin
Right.
of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And I was just curious. I haven't heard anything yet from that.
They had a lot of people there. It was essentially the international psychedelic community is still defining itself, because there's no consensus about methods or materials. I mean, some people are using ketamine in psychotherapy, other people regard it as a veterinary anesthetic, and you can't tell who's got it right. But I think the maturity of the European research community is just sufficient that they're probably going to restart it. And then this country will have to decide what it's going to do. Anybody want to say any more about this? Let me see if I wanted to say any more about it. It made me think of a funny cartoon, the whole subject of madness. Maybe some of you saw this cartoon in the New Yorker a few years ago, but a bunch of obviously very straight businessmen are sitting around a conference table, and they have the downward moving chart of their company's profits up on the wall in front of them. And the CEO is saying to a smiling man sitting at the end of the table, "It's true, Headley, a deliberate derangement of the senses worked for Rimbaud, but would it work for us?" And it's worth remembering, that this madness we fear so much, we are essentially the unhappy inheritors of the Romantic legacy. I mean, they brought this upon us. This is what they wanted. They worshipped this. And the entirety of the 20th century has been a deconstruction of gentlemanly reason. Abstract expressionism, all of these things, Freudianism, Jung, National Socialism, it's all anti-reasonable. I mean, from the point of view of the 19th century, we don't have to worry about madness. We are mad, every last one of us. I mean, we've so thoroughly imbibed the values of modernity that we are incomprehensible to our own past. And this brings up the issue of, someone said it was a problem of consensus. What do you do if the society is crazy?
Hey there, thanks for listening. Wizards of Word is a passion project of mine, and every like, comment, and subscribe really helps the channel out. If you enjoy this video or get something from it, please consider smashing that like button or giving a subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks.